Welcome, everybody. So my name is Jennifer New. I'm the Associate Director of the Obermann Center for Advanced Studies. And as you probably already gathered, if you've been here for a few minutes, Teresa Mangum, the Director of the Obermann Center, is ailing a bit with some voice issues that she's trying to save her throat. So I am here in her good stead, and we're also in good company with our very well prepared panelists. So we're talking today about publicly engaged humanities graduate education by degrees. Across the country, colleges and universities are reimagining humanities graduate education to address students' commitment to public-facing work and professional development needs. As a result, many institutions have taken steps to tailor humanities pedagogy to meet student demands by creating master's programs and graduate certificates in public humanities. As the University of Iowa Andrew W. Mellon-funded Humanities for the Public Good initiative participants design a graduate certificate and master's degree, we have consulted with many leaders in graduate education, and they have shared creative experiments with a number of degrees, from certificates to master's degrees to a PhD. So we'll be hearing from some of those people today who we've spoken with, three of whom I know have already been on campus. And I'll just make brief introductions in the order in which I'm hoping you'll then introduce yourself and say a little bit more about each of you and your programs. So Raymond Haberski, apologies, is a professor of history, director of American Studies, and associate dean for academic programs in the School of Liberal Arts at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. And I'm not going to go into your program, Ray, because I'm going to just let you do that in each case. And then we'll hear from Ryan McBride, who is Administrative Associate Professor of English at Tulane University in probably much warmer New Orleans, and Director of the Mellon Graduate Program in Community Engaged Scholarship, an interdisciplinary certificate program in the Center for Public Service. And then next we'll hear from Susan Smulyan, who is a professor of American Studies at Brown University and the recent director of the John Nicholas Brown Center for Public Humanities and Cultural Heritage. And then finally, Kathryn Temple joins us from Georgetown, and she is related to the MA degree in Engaged and Public Humanities there. So again, if we could just start with each of you giving us a brief overview of your program as it relates to this conversation about degrees, and starting with you, Ray.
Sure, thanks. This is a real joy to be with you all. It's the best part of my day, no doubt, after a series of meetings of talking about budgets and cuts and things like that. It's nice to have a conversation about building and growing and things like that. So the American Studies PhD program has been in existence for about 6 years. We graduated our first cohort last year. We'll have another 3 graduating this year. The design of it is pretty straightforward. We want to train people to be anything but university faculty, which means that we get a lot of people who are coming in thinking about sort of changing their careers midstream. And we sit on the edge of Indianapolis. We're basically in the edge of downtown Indianapolis. So we literally use the city as a partner in almost everything we do. A lot of the research centers on campus here have some sort of application to what the city is doing one way or another. And I was amazed that once I started this program, when I started asking people in the city and research centers on campus to support students, either full tuition or stipend, they said yes, consistently. So all sorts of people. So the Indy Chamber of Commerce, the Health and Hospitals Corporation here, the Sports Corp, the mayor's office, but also research centers that do public policy, that do stuff on ethics and medicine. All of them have funded us one way or another. But I think the key to it has been to be very nimble, right? That we have students who sort of create their own track when they get funding. So it's not, we don't have 5 or 6 students doing one sort of thing. But together they make up a really fascinating group. So typically our cohorts that come in they number between 6 and maybe 8, 10 students each year. And so far it's been going great. I mean, we've covered the costs of student tuition almost completely through external funding, and we get a lot of stipend support from research centers. So it's been very fun to do this, and the students I know would be familiar to many of you. You know, they're really interesting folks, especially those who are coming in sort of mid-career, and more than half of them right now are part-time, more than half are women, and 1/3 are students of color. So it's been very interesting to see who we attract. So that's sort of an overview here of the American Studies program.
Great, thank you so much. Ryan, can you share with us what's happening at Tulane?
Sure, yes. Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to have this conversation and to learn from what others are doing. And I love the idea too of thinking about it as scoped, or as like PhD programs, master's programs, certificate programs, and looking at the various ways that this can be done. And so Ray was mentioning being nimble, and that really speaks to, I think, what all of us are doing. So to have us together here thinking through these things, I think is really invaluable. And I wished I'd had it when we were starting off, a few years ago, just to hear the conversations. What are the possibilities? Because I found myself scanning through websites and who's doing this? And you look for publicly engaged, or you look for, it's hard to find exactly what will bring you all together in terms of search terms. And then how are they like us? How are they not like us? And what can we borrow from them? So hopefully this is an easier route into that. So thanks for allowing me to be part of this too. Let's see. So I'm at Tulane University, and I have my PhD's in Greek philosophy, but somehow they let me teach in the English department. And I spent a couple of years, a decade ago, just trying to think about how to do community engaged work with Greek philosophy, which really, I think, sort of set me in motion for all of these great conversations that I have with graduate students who are also trying to connect their graduate studies to community engaged organizations. And I ultimately, over 2 years, I teach a classical rhetoric course where my students coach middle school debate in local middle schools, and I've been co-directing that league for the last 12 years. It's a great position to be in. And then they've somehow also allowed me to direct this graduate program in community engaged scholarship, and it was initially a fellowship, and then we received a grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, which I think has funded a bunch of great things, including obviously the program at Iowa. And they have, and so with that, it became a certificate program, which I think has been really helpful, and has really embedded the program into the structure of the university in powerful ways. I'll get into the nuts and bolts of it, I guess, as we move along. But basically, we have students from the arts and humanities who are in master's or PhD programs who want to, along the way, get a certificate in community engaged scholarship. So they apply and they join if they're selected. We have 12 a year who are selected. Then it's a 2-year program. And they join a cohort. So the 12 graduate students join with 4 faculty members and 4 community leaders. And that cohort of 20 stays together for 2 years. We have monthly dinners together and a little bit of coursework, but nothing that will slow down the time to graduation, which was an important thing that they didn't want us to do. So it's a long enough program. It's 2 years, but it's not too onerous as they go along. They can do it while they're doing their other work. And the first part of it, they are making connections with with folks, community organizations, cultural organizations. So probably about the first year-ish. And then for the second year, they're doing some kind of collaborative project with with whoever they partner with. So I'll leave it there.
Just a quick question before I lose sight of it is how many people apply? You said that if they're selected.
Yeah, around 30-ish,
Okay.
something like that for 12 positions. And it's only arts, it's only humanities and arts students who can. And so like a large number of graduate students, I think it's more than, it's not half, but it's close. It's between a third and a half of graduate students apply. So I think there's a lot of interest in it.
Yeah, clearly. Yeah, thank you. So Susan, first of all, nice to meet you. You're the one person here I haven't formally met. So please tell us about the program at Brown that you're associated with.
Oh, thanks very much. It's fun to be here. It's fun. It's always fun for me to talk about pedagogy. I always think there just isn't enough time. I'm always glad to do that. It's really fun. And I have for years thought that one of the great things about this kind of work is the way in which it blurs the line between pedagogy and scholarship and service. And so it's sort of just by its very existence throws the sort of holy trinity of the university into deep confusion, which is a good thing, I think. And so I'm amused, I'm not amused, but I'm thrilled to be able to talk about pedagogy sort of separately, but I want to just make a pointer to the idea that these three things come together in this kind of work. So I helped conceive and then ran for 6 years an MA program in Public Humanities. Began a long time ago now, like 2007. It was a collaboration between American Studies, which at Brown includes ethnic studies, and the John Nicholas Brown Center for Public Humanities, which had just become part of the university. It's a terminal, which I'm told not to use anymore, but because it makes people sound like they're ill, but a concluding, I'm told is a better phrase, a concluding 2-year MA for about 10 students a year. Then it was also possible for PhD students in American Studies to get the MA in Public Humanities on the way to the PhD instead of the MA in American Studies. They swapped it out and they got an MA in Public Humanities and a PhD in American Studies. And that was very popular with about 2/3 of the PhD students in American Studies taking that option. Other departments in the university were not interested. They didn't want to, they worried that it would cause them to cut down the number of courses that their students would have to take in order to get the MA, in order to leave some room for the Public Humanities classes. In American Studies, we just swapped some courses. We thought all the courses counted. But once Brown introduced a graduate certificate program, students from around the university could get a certificate in Public Humanities. That has not proven to be hugely popular, not anywhere close to what's going on in Tulane, but it worked great for the students who opted in, so 1 or 2 a year. So we had started with a concluding master's. We have that's a 2-year program. We have a set of students, about 2/3 of the American Studies PhD students get the MA in Public Humanities on the way to the PhD, and now there's a certificate program that's ongoing as part of Brown's certificates, graduate certificate programs. It's one among several that you can get on your way to the PhD. And those students come from a range of departments, maybe not as wide as you would think, but we've had a bunch from archaeology and anthropology turn out to be the most popular places to do that cross work. That's all I got.
Great, thank you. And Kathryn, please tell us about the program at Georgetown.
Yeah, well, I just love going last because one thing I was reflecting on was how all of these programs just have such, very different courses from initial idea to, some kind of manifestation, and ours is really no exception. We started out with a proposal in the English department to create a non-traditional PhD program, which would have had a strong public humanities aspect with a required 1 year, not internship, but we were calling it a residency in a public humanities type of organization, different types of PhD projects rather than a dissertation, things like that. And that was in maybe 2010, 12, I can't even remember. It's all blurred together now, especially after COVID. But there was a lot of interest in the English department, and then there was very vehement opposition from a group that felt that it would dilute the PhD, that it wouldn't be a real degree, that people wouldn't get jobs, that all the things that you've probably heard if you've been in this world, that people don't need a PhD to do that kind of work, et cetera, et cetera. So I was chair then, very glad to end that particular chairship. And we had a vote, and I barely, got over the majority, but we did get a positive vote. But the administration, and I think rightly so, felt that we were in the middle of a recession. The department didn't fully support it, didn't want to go forward with it. So right around that time, the Modern Language Association produced a report about graduate education that basically came up with all the, these 4 or 5 major ideas for changing the PhD in the humanities, and they mapped right onto our proposal. So I just, happened to read about it in the Chronicle. In those days, the Chronicle had comments. There were a lot of negative comments, attacks on the committee. And I thought, well, I'll just send them their proposal so they know there are some people out there who are supportive of this. So I sent it, and that evolved into working with the MLA on a Mellon grant on increasing diverse employment opportunities for graduate students in the humanities. So we did that for a few years, and the Georgetown part of that was to produce some kind of a program. We started wanting a PhD, then for a while the administration was pushing us towards an MA, then back to the PhD, then for a while a certificate. So we just, kind of were trying out all these different ideas. What we ended up with is MA in the Engaged in Public Humanities. It was again delayed due to COVID. The first year was right in the middle of COVID, and we had a lot of international students, and it just didn't seem right to, start them off on Zoom or whatever. So we started this year in September 2021. We probably had about 60 applications, accepted admitted about 20 students, some part-time, some full-time. It's a 2-year program. I was really interested to hear what Raymond had to say about funding, because funding has been a really big issue for this program. Originally, we had a beautiful budget with lots of scholarship money, and then COVID. And all our budgets basically were just, I don't know if they used a shredder, but it felt like it. So every single thing that we wanted for the program, even like web, support and stuff like that, had to be individually negotiated. All of our marketing budget was taken away. I had to negotiate like $3,000 here, $3,000 there for scholarships, and private school tuition. That's crazy, but we still had a large, we had a great cohort. I'm not directing it because I was asked to chair the department again this year as an interim. So I'm chairing, but I did teach the core course in the fall, and I just loved the students so much. I mean, it was amazing. The diversity of the students. They were international. There were African-American students from the district who were already working in various public humanities positions. There were people right out of school from across the country who were just fascinated by doing this. And then we were cross-listing the courses. So surprisingly, I ended up with 6 English MAs in there as well. And they all did the project for the first core course was to find a grant giving agency and write a grant proposal, hopefully submitting it during the course of the semester. And we just had fascinating projects. And I'd really like to hear more about some of the other projects, but just to give you one example, one student invented a tabletop game that was based on a medieval poem that I had never heard of before. And it's a digital project, so people can go to a website, download the instructions, download the board, play with each other online, et cetera, et cetera. And she wrote a grant proposal, submitted it to, I think, Medieval Studies Association in Boston, and got a good reaction, but no funding. but still, I thought that was amazing for a first year MA student, you know. And then we had another student who wrote a really interesting proposal and actually has had several meetings with the Virginia Humanities. What do they call it? It's a branch of the NEH in Charlottesville, and I think they might eventually fund something for her. So, and there were so many great projects. So I love teaching that course. So after I have my sabbatical, I'll probably come back and teach it again. And the program's in good hands at this point. So yeah.
Great, thank you. You were just touching on how much you love the students, and several of you talked about the diversity of the students who are in your programs. If you could talk a little bit more in any order about what you think is attracting students to your program. What are they looking for that maybe they're not getting from other parts of the university?
I mean, I might jump in just quickly. I think one of the things that is an advantage of our program is that we use the entire School of Liberal Arts as the curriculum. So we have 2 mandatory courses, but other than that, they take courses anywhere in school. If I get funding for tuition from outside of the school, so it's not being paid by my program in particular, they can take classes anywhere on campus. So I have students who have taken classes in the School of Philanthropy, the School of Public Health, the Center for Ethics and Medicine, things like that. So I think at this point, when I talk to the dean of our grad studies, she loves the idea. It's just very hard to imagine doing this for any program at any time on campus. But the fact that it's worked well for our program because we can use funding from somewhere else, and basically the students pay their tuition. They get funded from an external agency or organization. It's their money now. They can spend it any way they want. It's not taken away from my program or something like that, because we're funding nothing basically of their work, except giving them the ability to create these really interesting committees. Both the committees that will work on their comps, and then ultimately the research committee for the dissertations. We do have mandatory courses in American Studies that everybody takes for the program, and there are plenty of courses in the School of Liberal Arts that these students like. So it ends up being like the majority will be in the school. But I think that was one of the things that has really attracted people, is the flexibility, because they have these huge questions. Like I have one student who's working with a research center here on redlining in the city, right? The historic problem of redlining. She comes out of the real estate market. Like she was a real estate agent for 20 years.
Wow.
And she wants to know how real estate companies should be talking to each other in their professional organizations, to their clients, to sort of the local groups that organize them and stuff like that, about the historic problem of redlining. There's no concerted effort really to deal with this, other than responding every once in a while to like media reports, So she's taking classes sort of across the campus, geography, sociology, anthropology. She's doing stuff with GIS, with philanthropic studies. So it's really enabled her to sort of bring together methods and content that will be very effective when she tries to actually write or come up with a dissertation question. And I think that in itself is why the program has been so attractive to students.
And I'm curious, like in that specific case of that student, it seems like a little bit I'm having a chicken or the egg thought in my mind. Like, is she somebody who was going to go to graduate school anyway? Or is it that she saw this program and then...
So I'll tell you, I'll make this statement and you'll probably laugh. None of these people need a PhD. They just don't. They have careers, almost all of them. But we're offering a way for them to think through problems or questions or ideas that they've had for a while, and to leverage the university. I'm sure it's the same with you all. We have so many talented faculty who will never have graduate students, or certainly not PhD students, at least at this public university, we just don't. But now we have a chance to give them students in like their MA classes, or they can run a readings class to PhD level, or we create a PhD seminar that they will run for the first time in their career here, but it's really, for the most part, these people, I think it has liberated them by not telling them that they have to go in a particular track that's already been created by the discipline or by the field. They come in with these big questions. They're like, well, how do I answer them? How do I address them? I'm like, well, that's what universities are for, to take a look at these things. And so, listen, they're teaching us as much as, in many ways, how to conceive of what the university should be doing, for students. I think it often happens. Like I was at Brown the other day with my daughter. She's looking at it as an undergraduate.
Oh,
and I think it's the most perfect undergraduate environment on earth,
Yeah.
It's so beautiful the way that you can sort of, play around with different fields and disciplines. That's what we wanted to do here at the
Well,
PhD.
I was going to say that's what's similar. That's what makes sense to me, because Brown has had what they like to call an open curriculum.
Yeah.
Or a new curriculum. It's all kind of, well, anyway, it's a marketing tool. But and we tried to recreate that to a certain extent in the MA program or the MA on the way to the PhD, with the idea that students could have a freedom if they had. These were mostly, we were right on that they were mostly people who were early career or just out of college. We didn't get many. We haven't gotten many people who are career switchers or but our idea was that it would be for people who didn't kind of finish up. They had more questions that they wanted to answer. 4 years wasn't quite enough, and that they could come and then at the same time think through some of the big questions about these subjects in public life. One of the things I think we didn't see, and that has maybe not even changed, but certainly changed since 2008, and then again in the pandemic, is the deep need for young people to get, they feel this great pressure to have jobs, and in a way that, everybody needs a job, but this is a different kind of compulsion. It feels so to me. I'm not against it. It's what they feel, so that they were much less willing to explore, although some of them still are, but events caught up with us, and they're much more careerist. It always strikes me as hilarious that they come to this big research university with all the options they could imagine and everything's placed in front of them, and all they want to do is make sure that everything they do has a line on a resume. How will I get a job with this? And I understand the compulsion and the deep need for that. But so it seems to me that I had thought that we were going to have to say, no, we have to be practical about these things. And now I find myself saying the opposite. No, you're here, you need to explore a little, and we'll get you some practical experience, I promise. And I'm not sure that that's what employers want. I don't know if anyone knew that. It's just like advertisers don't know what consumers want. I don't know what employers want. Nobody knows. If we knew, we'd tell them and they'd all get jobs just with the way they wanted. It doesn't work like that. So I say, so go learn some stuff so that you can tell the employers there's going to have to be content in whatever you do, and we'll give you a bunch of skills. I promise. We'll do methods. You'll do internships. Well, there'll be lots of projects you can point to. I have to say, these are not, the students we've been getting are not the students who spend their time in the library. They spend their time doing small exhibits here, there, and everywhere. They spend their time leading walking tours. They just anything that gets them some more experience is what they want. So we sort of planned for one set of students, and we got a slightly different set of students. And you can't. I'm not going to tell them how to be. You meet the students you get, right? And then try and figure it out. But the ranging around the university, that speaks to my sort of interdisciplinary heart, and that's what I had always hoped for. And they do some of it, but that balance between what we sort of in shorthand call content and method, which doesn't work really, but they find that completely. I say the best courses have both. You're going to learn some methods and you're going to learn some content. They They just want method courses. Don't bother me.
So, Susan, I love what you're saying. I want to connect with my son, who is an undergrad at the University of Michigan and is just on this, like, like this total, like, what will get me to the next thing, And I'm like, you're in Candyland. Go take a class. And
I think universities are just, this is the way it's an odd thing, because we didn't think this is the way in which we would be old fogies, but this is exactly the way in which we're old fogies. They don't want to hear that. And I don't think you reach people by saying, you're a stupid careerist. I mean, I've had to come up with other ways of talking, and I'm taking suggestions, but it's a bit of a trick. And I think, Ray, we may be on to something, that the idea is that some of these courses are best left to they're wasted on the young. I don't mean that exactly, but that there's a moment in one's life where you see that, okay, that's what we want to do, is ask the big questions. It's not that college students aren't asking the big questions. Yeah. They still are. I don't mean to go too far with this, but it is a difference.
Yeah. Ryan, what is the kind of age range of your students? And then, what are they really attracted to about entering your program?
Yeah, I mean, we were surprised too about the students that who applied, and especially I think the students who, because we have like more applicants than we can bring in, then they write an essay, and oftentimes it's the non-traditional students. So the students who are coming back, like a lot of our students, they were in the Peace Corps. They taught at a charter school for 5 years, or they worked for an arts organization for the last, decade, or, so they're coming back a lot. I'd say more than half are that way. And also speaking to, what Ray was saying too about folks, people of color, people with marginalized identities, undocumented, like various, I think like there's a way that you bring with you with those life experiences, like a level of sophistication and maybe an interest in connecting the studies that you're doing in your home discipline to something larger in the world. And so we get a lot of graduate students who are interested in doing that. And I mean, I think it comes back to this idea of the students, we're in some ways, I feel like programs like the one that I'm running, I'm just supporting students, right? I mean, they're the ones who come in with these ideas, and I feel like, they're in their home disciplines. And like one of the things that I think we've found that might be different from a standalone program is that like they feel a lot of times the graduate students in home departments, they're in home departments where they're like, maybe one or two people are interested in public humanities, or, there's like two professors that they can talk to about this, and maybe one grad student. So to come to a program where they're part of a cohort for 2 years and they get to know, students from other disciplines who are doing like not the same thing, but analogous things and things that they're like, oh yeah, I can, and they learn from one another and we learn from them. And we have community
They
leaders
don't worry about the job market, Ryan. That's all our PhD students will talk to me about. It's like, well, but what about the job market? I'm like, well, it's tough. I don't, and I tell you, we work really hard to get a diverse group of students, especially racial diversity, which is a real tough go because tuition's high and funding is hard. And I'll tell you, when somebody looks me in the eye and says, but I'm going to need a job, I say, I hear you, you do. And so I just back right off. I'm not saying they aren't wonderful students and I don't enjoy teaching them, but I think it adds a different, it's sort of a different layer of, and the PhD students are to a certain extent, the ones who are interested, fabulous, but a lot of them just spend all their time. I'll do this, but I'm so nervous about the job market.
So, Susan, are they nervous about the academic job market, or just about?
They are really nervous about the academic job market, but they just I think they're not wrong that all job markets are terrible. And so this idea that if you don't get an academic job, you'll just jump into something else and that will be welcoming and easy. They don't think that's true. Actually, I don't think that's true. That alt ac is easier than getting a job on the tenure track. All jobs are really hard.
I have mixed feelings about that. I mean, I do think it's easier to get some sort of alternative professional job than it is to get a job on the tenure track right now. But
there just aren't many jobs that there are many jobs, for people without professional degrees. I mean, teachers are having trouble getting jobs. So it's hard to imagine that PhDs in humanities are finding it easy.
No, I don't think it's easy, but we had a certificate program that ran for a few years under the Mellon, and the students who did that program, where we introduced them to like this job consultant who mostly works with humanities, graduate students, either PhD or MAs. We took them around DC, did site visits to a bunch of public humanities places. We did a sort of speed dating thing with about 20 people who had taken their PhDs in the humanities and turned them into non-academic jobs, and did that over a 4-day period. And those folks have really done very well. But one thing they do have to learn, it's not a 2-week process finding that kind of job, right? It's a 3 to 6 month process. So we've got people from that program who are at the Library of Congress, at the Smithsonian, in consulting firms. We have a couple of people at Deloitte. It's just really interesting. One's at the FBI, doing PR basically, and running an office. They're professional positions, right? So I do think that's easier, having done a job search here at Georgetown for a person in race and ethnic studies, and we had 300 applications. And probably of those, 200 people were perfectly well qualified for that position. I think it's a little bit, it's not easy, but and you need to provide the resources to help them navigate it, because it's not a clear path, right? And that was one of the things that we worked on a lot with the Mellon grant. And I think one thing you're running into, Susan, is they wish it was a clear path. I mean, and this is why people end up going to law school, because I think they can go to law school and then they'll get it, that it's very straightforward in terms of how that's going to work out. It's not like that anymore. It was when I went to law school in the late 70s. But anyhow, I just our mileage may differ, right? But this has been our mileage, and I have to admit, we're in a great place for these kinds of jobs. There's a lot of these kind of jobs out there in the Washington area, right? And actually, right now, people are begging people to apply, right, for the sort of what we used to call the alt-ac jobs. So
I wonder if we could talk a little bit about the partnerships that you formed. And so, Kathryn, it sounds you referred to like a year-long residency, I think is how you put it.
That was our original.
Okay.
And we're doing a 6 credit for the master's. That was for the PhD program that we proposed. For the master's, they do 6 credits of internship over the summer. Mm-hmm. So they're, we're helping them, we're working with them, but they're also very much encouraged to be self-directive with this. So right now they're fielding, this is just the first year, so we'll see how this goes, but a couple of things at the Smithsonian. I already know one student is already placed at the Smithsonian, but we're also sending them out to talk to startups and people like that. Lots of different possibilities out there for somebody in the humanities.
And so do you make the initial connection, or is it really up to the student to make those?
It's a partnership. So for instance, with the Virginia Humanities people, the student came up with that idea, but then I did one meeting with them, and that resulted in a couple of internship promises. We'll see if they come through. And we're not, because they're credit bearing, they don't have to be paid internships, but a number of these are paid internships. So we'll see how, it's the first year, so there's no guarantees, but it's, just like a student going to Brown, a student going to Georgetown, and taking that credential out and using it out in the job market can be super helpful. So it opens a lot of doors for them just to have the fact, just the fact that they're in a degree program at Georgetown opens doors. So I think we'll do okay. I've worked on, there's like 30 or 40 people who have come to these certificate programs that we have. So we have a long list of people, connections that they can make. We work with them on getting their LinkedIn pages up to speed so they can connect with other people from Georgetown who are already out. I mean, just lots and lots of different connections. I work with DC Humanities on a bunch of grants. So I know people there, just, and I'm not a super networker. The person who's running the program this year is much more out there than I am. And I think she's making more connections.
Right, thanks. If others could share about how you find partners, public partners, and develop those relationships, that would be appreciated.
Okay, so I've been one story for you. I had a student came in, she had a sociology MA from IUPIU. She worked with nonprofits in the city for a long time. A lot of them were African-American sort of entrepreneurial nonprofits. She was frustrated that the folks that she worked with were never given seats at the table where big decisions were made for the city. And the place, the table, where the table actually sits is in the Indy Chamber of Commerce. So I went to the Indy Chamber. I said, you have an initiative on equity and diversity. I have a student who's interested in exactly that. I think you should create a position for her in our PhD program. They said, great, we will. So they funded her for 2 years. They've now hired her as their diversity director. And that's, so she built the table. She built the seat at the table. But that's how it happened, right? And similar stories like that. The Health and Hospitals Corporation was interested in trying to figure out the sort of impact that they're having in their urban gardens. So a student was interested in doing that. She had an interesting idea of how to do that. They funded her position. We have a guy who's doing work with the Indiana State Teachers Association. He's looking at data that they've been collecting for years, right, and didn't really know what to do with. And he is, in part, taking that data and looking at the groups that shape the public perception of teachers in Indiana, which you can imagine is complicated, but often seems to be one-sided, right? And so he's trying to give them insight into which groups they should be connecting more with, or which sort of pressure points to push to help the overall reputation of teachers in the state. So it's stuff like that. And again, I think the key is that we're using sort of humanities theories, so sometimes social science methods, for organizations that are not necessarily cultural institutions or humanities organizations.
Mm-hmm. And do you ever act as kind of matchmaker? I mean, do you have organizations come to you, or is it always the student driving it?
No. We as the program has sort of developed, we definitely had people sort of reach out to us and say, so what do you, is this something that you guys might be interested in thinking through with us, for a student, something like that. And so in that case, then we'll try to create a profile together and then go out and recruit a student for that.
Mm-hmm. And Ryan, you have a public partners you're working with for a year. Is that 2 years? 2 years.
2 years. 2 years. Now, but I have an advantage where I'm my office right here, where I'm in the Center for Public Service here at Tulane, and we have a 2-tier service learning requirement at Tulane. Like we used to say we're the first. Now we're the only R1 institution with a 2-tier service learning requirement. So like we have, hundreds of active partners around the city. And so we can draw from that. We also put out a call for participation for community leaders, essentially, who'd be interested in mentoring and being part of a cohort for 2 years. And the people who applied to do this are unbelievable. I'm not kidding you. I'm in complete awe of them, and every time I enter the room, I should just stop talking and let them talk. But they And they are with our graduate students for 2 years. So they really get to know them and develop relationships there. Their goal is not to work with these community leaders. Instead, they help us network even further and say, like, so if you're interested in, say, for instance, fair housing, they'll say, okay, you can talk to Jane Place, or you need to talk to this person, community sustainability initiative, or talk to this organization, or here's an event that's happening. And so there's a lot of that. And really I think it takes a long time to sort of figure out the landscape. And I mean, most of our grad students they're already in their PhD or MA program. So they have an idea of what their subject matter is, but then how to connect that to the world. I think that's really important for them. And it's really like a way that you tap into what you initially liked about the subject anyway. I think for a lot of them, it's not, because I mean, some people want to just do research in the library, and that's fine. I mean, that's totally fine. But I think a lot of folks want to connect it to something else and to ground it. And that can be it's a difficult thing to do. And it takes a while, I think. So we're always like, go have coffee with folks who are doing work that you value. Ask them who to talk to. Go to their events. Volunteer. Embed yourself as much as you can. Understand the lay of the land, so that And then they have, within a year-ish, they're supposed to come up, figure out, okay, this is who I want to work with. And they'll say, you want to work with me, and they have a budget to do a project, and then so for the second half of the 2-year process, they're usually doing something, often something pretty amazing. So, and I think that's part of why they're not so they're more and I think they do care about jobs. I'm not saying that. And some of them have been hired on by organizations they've worked with afterwards. It's not uncommon, because, they bring a lot to the table. But I think there's also just this notion that I think that if all the skills that they learn doing this kind of work, talking across disciplines, talking to people who are not in academia about really interesting ideas, developing authentic relationships, all those things are things that we generally scholars, PhD students have not been good at in the past. And that's one of the reasons they don't get hired. At least anecdotally, I don't have studies to back that up, but I think that by doing public humanities work, you put yourself in a better position to make a case for yourself, no matter where you go. But I'll stop there.
Yeah, I think that's what I've seen once they are out there and having to meet people and think about the real world applications, they become much more employable. And we saw that, our program, this MA in Public Humanities is new, but our English MA started offering this sort of Public Humanities option about 4 years ago. And those students are going into some amazing jobs, like working with film companies and with, as Raymond was saying, not the traditional public humanities outlets that we generally think of. So I think that's been really, the students they're teaching and learning centers. I'm trying to think of all the different things that they do, but they're very employable after that degree. I just wanted to get back to that question of what kind of students want to be in an MA like this, because I found it just fascinating when I was recruiting this class, that the students that were getting in touch with me and really wanting to talk to me, they loved the humanities, but they didn't want to be faculty. They were just very clear that they didn't want to be faculty because they didn't want to be just sitting in front of a laptop doing research all the time, or just being in the classroom. They wanted to be out in the world. So one thing our program offers, which I believe Susan's program was, pretty much the model for this, is like a deep dive into the humanities. They take 4 courses that they can choose from, pretty much across the campus. And then 4 courses that are more, my core course is very theoretically oriented towards introducing them to all the issues in public humanities and all the issues in engaged humanities. But the other 3 courses are more sort of instrumental. A digital humanities course, a writing for the public course, and then a course on public and private institutions that benefit from, Raymond, I thought you were talking about humanities habits of mind, basically, taking humanities habits of mind out into the world. So I just thought that was fascinating to talk to those kinds of students.
So let's shift to, I really like that, like, what are those required classes? So maybe we can get back to that, but I want to be sure to get in this next question, which we've already touched on a little bit. But of course, one of the ongoing issues in times of budget scarcity is anxiety about competition for resources. And so, and I heard, also concerns of time to graduation, which is also a sort of scarcity model. So how have you persuaded your humanities departments with PhDs of the value of your programs? And how have you built a collaborative, student-centered, career diversity supporting spirit at your institution?
The quick answer is I went to meetings in so many departments when we were starting this program. And it was interesting. I mean, there are many departments actually who really welcome our MA students because they are under enrolled. So all the foreign languages, for instance, museum studies here was under enrolled. They are excited to have our students. And then some of the larger programs like the history program, they can afford to take in a couple students a year. I mean, it's not going to be a loss to them to have a couple of extra students in their classes, but this is just an MA, it's not a PhD.
So we didn't really have the example. I'm sorry, Ryan. We didn't have any PhD level humanities graduate programs. And it was one of the reasons why the campus encouraged us to create this one. But we did have a very good model in museum studies and public history at the MA level, that most of the students who came in were immediately linked up with cultural institutions and did internships while they were doing coursework. So we had a very nice model for how that kind of system worked at the MA level. So the question is, should we do it at the PhD level? And by doing that, would I, by creating this program, compete with those two programs? And I assured them that I wouldn't, because I wouldn't be going to those cultural institutions. There are, again, it's sort of the same sort of thing. If we're not going to run a PhD program to build more faculty, the potential for more faculty, I also wasn't going to create a PhD program that was going to produce new sort of cultural workers in history museums or historical societies and things like that. I was going to look everywhere else. And that's what's happened. And so we've actually had people who went through some of the MA programs who have come back to do a PhD because I got jobs. This one guy's doing this great thing. He went out and was working in Indiana. Was it the Natural Resources Agency? He has come back and he's doing something on environmental racism for his PhD. And I think that and is hooked up with all these different projects on water that's happening all throughout the city right now. But I think he would be ideal to work at a high level in the park system, because they're trying to create a much more robust reason for the park system to exist in communities that have been historically dumped on, marginalized, and having somebody who is really attuned to the idea of environmental racism in an executive position in that kind of organization would make a lot of sense. So that's what we're sort of gearing towards.
I had a question, and I'm fascinated by the idea that you got public organizations, nonprofit organizations to come up with money for students.
Yeah.
And the ones, I mean, I've tried to raise money for years and years. I raised a fair amount within the university for students. But the organizations our students worked with tended not to have any money. So they were eager to welcome the students as an extra pair of hands or to collaborations, or eager would go too far. The problem of working at a very old institution that has a very bad reputation in the community is and that isn't, it's there's a lot to overcome. But if we could get over that, and we did, because people are gracious and wonderful, but our students were interested in places that, and maybe you just found different places. You didn't go to the historical society, so you went to places that had money. How do you figure out which ones?
I think you know that there are a lot of organizations now, professional organizations that are aligned with city, state governments, things like that, that have money to look at systemic problems, and they simply don't have the time or the staff to throw at these situations.
So the students are doing mostly research, not programs.
Meaning that they're not producing programs for these places, you mean? Yeah, I mean, most of them are doing like straight up research because there's like some sort of entity on campus that is also doing research in that area. And so one of the ways that we can attract these organizations is like we become, I mean, in some ways, a cut rate consulting firm by the university for the big questions that you have to deal with anyway, that you don't have the money or the people to throw at. Yeah.
Right. I have to say that when that works, it's a beautiful thing. I have many students who didn't want to do research. They're not interested in research.
Yes.
That's like they're not actually talking to the public. And they came to this program because what they want to do is be in collaboration with the public, whatever that means. But the research seems a step away. It isn't. I can see it, and it makes perfect sense to me. And the projects that we did do that were research-based worked maybe the best. But I think it's really a good idea to look for places that need research done.
And it's also that these places they're trying to address big public issues, big public problems, right? And it's not public programming that often is the thing dealing with those problems. It's often these big agencies, these big organizations, these really big nonprofits that are often now charged with philanthropic, resources.
It's your idea that Kathryn liked as well, the humanities theories and social science methods, which I think is a brilliant way to think about it.
Because all these questions originate in the humanities. We know that. So, and I think, Ryan has been talking about this from the get-go, where his students are coming from, they're coming back from dealing with, in organizations that have dealt with this sort of stuff.
And I think of, so our Humanities for the Public Good internship program during the summer, which are paid opportunities. And so, for example, we had a student 3 summers ago working with an environmental group and was doing research, but was also doing it with their director, going door to door, doing qualitative research, and also learning from her how to facilitate large public meetings, and then doing research through that. So he was able to do some kinds of research for them that they didn't have, ready access or people power. But then he also learned these skills that as an English PhD was not in his wheelhouse. I wanted to return to the question of that kind of hands across the water with our humanities partners. And I know, Ryan, you had alluded to things that it sounded like when you were getting this started that maybe some people didn't want you to do this or do that. But what are the ways that you have created those relationships in a positive way? And maybe, things that walls you hit up against as well.
Yeah, so initially when the Mellon Foundation, like the grant we got was to put together a certificate program. And I was like, these graduate students don't care about a certificate. That was my initial reaction. Like, why would we do that? But I think in developing the certificate, you create a structure that requires, and this maybe speaks to what Kathryn was talking about, requires you to form a faculty steering committee, right? And say, what should this look like? How should we build this, right? And in fact, like I was, we brought up together some really amazing faculty. I begged them to be on the committee, but they're from all different disciplines, and there's a conversation about it. And I think like that gradually allowed us to like gain some momentum and have some advocates who could, advocate for it in front of the faculty councils, the various councils we needed in order to pass the certificate program, and also to pass the classes that are associated with it. So I think like it was very, so people spoke in favor of it, and that helped. But I honestly believe that the best thing for the program, like, so we had disciplines like philosophy and and Portuguese and Spanish and Portuguese, and they were all three. Well, Spanish and Portuguese is one department here, but they were very skeptical, and they were like, we don't really want our graduate students to be involved in this, because it is. I mean, their graduate students would have to devote a certain amount of time to this program, and they were worried about time to degree. But I think there's also, they just thought it was a distraction. But the graduate students in those programs had asked them to apply. Can I apply for this? And I think they did not have the heart to say no. They didn't say no, because they started to apply. And we've had a couple of students from philosophy, one student who's studying immigration ethics and works for a small immigration organization here in town, like a grassroots organization that has like 3 people working for it. And, he talks about the questions that he's asking are different because he's understanding it from that level. And he himself is from Ghana and worked in a refugee organization in Eastern Europe for a while. So he has experiences, but this is like a way to connect the things that he's doing here and now with immigration ethics. And there's a woman from philosophy also who's doing really it's environmental ethics and working especially with environmental racism. And it's what, really, are you going to do that without being involved with the myriad of organizations here in New Orleans that are working on that? It just seems to me like incomprehensible that you would sit and you would study that and not be on the ground looking at things. And so I think there's so ethics is the way in for philosophy, but I think the larger issue is that graduate students, and we also have graduate students from Spanish and Portuguese who are amazing. So the graduate students who want to connect their ideas to the world are often really amazing, and they win them over. I was watching the Humanities for the Public Good video on creative dissertations, and one of the reasons that's so brilliant is because it showcases individual graduate students who are just taking it and running with it. And that's exactly what will convince. I mean, it doesn't convince the whole department at once, but their advisors, it convinces. And when they're on their committees, it starts to convince them. So that up close and personal, they're kind of like ambassadors for the program, as I see it. And they're way better than I think I could ever be.
It was interesting. We hired, using the Mellon funds, we hired 2 graduate students who had graduated and who'd finished their PhDs and were teaching in their home departments because they'd been on the job market for 2 years and not gotten jobs, right? And I won't mention what department it was, but it was a department that was not interested in our project. And both of those students, after working with us under the Mellon for 2 semesters, then went back on the job market and they both got jobs, right? And I do think that it had a lot to do with they're just able to talk about the profession. They got tenure line jobs. They were able to talk about the profession in a different way. And I think that might have had an influence on that department in terms of its acceptance of our program and our students. So that, to me, it's very founded in just personal outreach. Talking to people, talk.
And that's a natural segue into the question about success and how you measure success for the program and then what success looks like for the students. And as I think perhaps the longest running program, Susan, could you start?
I really can't. The program is changing.
Okay.
And I'm not, I don't know as much about it as I should. I think the problem of interaction, I think that success would be when many departments are interested and many students are interested. I think you guys are exactly right. And how you get that to happen is hard. I haven't found the PhD. I find the PhD students to be the ones in American Studies we admit affirmatively for activists. So they're insane. They have so many fights around the university that this is they're not interested in this fight anymore. They're on to others. But the rest of I have had students, PhD students, come and say, well, I'll take a certificate program, but is it possible to keep it secret from my department? Is it okay? Because I can't talk to my advisor. I mean, I have a student now who got a certificate, and I think she's going to go get a job in Washington, and it's all lined up, and it came from one of the internships, and it's great, just as it's supposed to happen. And she hasn't told anybody in the department that that's what she's going to do. So I think that success is what I'm hearing from my colleagues here. They have great success at getting a range of departments, humanities departments, to buy in. And then I think success is, again, the collaborations that you you and the students manage to set up. And success is having the students be at the center of this. And it's no surprise, Ryan, that they're your best ambassadors. You've set up a program where they're right at the center. What they want to know and what they're doing is what you've devised a program around. It's student-centered, so of course they're the best ambassadors. So a student-centered program with strong collaborators and buy-in around the university, that would be success. I can't say I'm there yet, but I'm very moved to hear that other people are closer.
I guess, I'm an associate dean now that has to count things for the school. And one of the ways that we try to count success, right, measure success, is through graduation. And so we've been, moving people through the program in about 4 years if they come in with an MA. And I think that's good. I don't think they need to stick around for 6, 8, 10 years. I know that I did, I took 6 years to go with an MA to go through a PhD program. And I lost most of my 20s in a way, right? It was great, but I also wasn't working for more than $15,000 a year, it seemed like. So, and many of these folks that are coming in now into my program are part-time, so they have full-time jobs. And the stipends that we could offer are laughably small, even if, I don't know if you heard that the IU students are about to go on, the graduate students are about to go on strike for a 5% raise. I think that was one of the things that they wanted. And I mean, God, if they don't deserve it, of course they do. So I think part of the success, or how we're measuring success right now, is just how the students are finding their ability to move to the program, to do this part-time and not feel like they're overwhelmed, to find reception, I think, as Susan was saying, from other departments, that other departments and mentors on the campus are happy to work with them. I think that is a great measure of success. It's certainly built up a lot of goodwill, I think, through the program. And I've gotten to know my colleagues across the campus a lot better and a lot quicker that way. And we are definitely moving on. I think one of the things I need to do is talk to Ryan about these community mentors. I think that's something I really need to develop. We have it for individual students, but I think inviting more people to come from the community, from different parts of the city to the campus more regularly, just to talk to the students overall it's a fantastic idea. So thanks for doing that so well.
I think it is too. We had a set of people when I was director who, I had a set of community fellows, because the university was very interested in this idea of fellows. And so that many of my colleagues are fellows of many centers around the university. But I said, okay, well, how about community fellows? And we spent a lot of time thinking about what we could give them, what they gave us. And then one of my problems was we gave them terms and they wouldn't leave. They just said, oh, well, just let me stay. I kind of like this. And they would show up to me. I couldn't get the faculty to come to meetings. These guys would come, they served as, we did Shark Tank, and the students would present their projects to them, and they would say what they thought about the projects and whether they could get funded or not. These were, before they would take them to the funding organizations. And they did a range of different things, but it any harder than corralling faculty to do things, but sort of coming. I like Ryan's idea. You know, he has a role. You have a role. It's written down. This is what they do. They come to these meetings. They work with these students, and that strikes me as really key. That when I was doing it, it was much more loosey-goosey, and I couldn't quite get it to make sense. It wasn't sensible, even though I knew it was a great idea. So I like the idea of having a project for everybody to work towards on.
That was actually one of the goals of our MA program, and I'm not sure the current director has managed it this year, but I know to a certain extent they have. But to have 2 mentors for each student, a faculty member and somebody from outside the university. Right, and we had a pretty good cohort going into the program. I'm just not sure whether Laura has managed to keep sort of shepherding.
Did you pay the community mentors?
No, these people love doing this. You know, they
just didn't seem right to me. The faculty were getting paid, and the community folks were not. So we were fussing with that. I get that.
We pay the faculty members and the community leaders the same amount to be advisors for this program. So they both get the exact same amount. And that's, we think that's, I mean, if we're actually thinking of them as educators, you know, I think it's fine to ask faculty to do stuff because it's kind of written in your job description. Although even, you know, even for speaking here, we'll get a stipend, you know, so like, I think the same sort of thing for a guest speaker and actually we want our community leaders to be part of a cohort so that we're all sort of co-educators. We're all learning from one another. We're all thinking about what this program is and what it needs to get better. And, you know, this just 2 weeks ago, a community leader and faculty member who pair up quite a bit said, hey, we need to talk about the program and how we can revise it to change it, to improve it, to make it, I think, more supportive for the graduate students in it. And you know, those changes are things, that's what's been happening along the way for the last 5 years. And I think it's something you can't do as a guest speaker, but it's something you can do if you've been with a program for 2 years. And you can advise graduate students in a way after you get to know them over 2 years. You can talk, I mean, and those relationships, it ends after 2 years. But they're welcome to come to our dinners. We had, you know, COVID kind of made it less fun on Zoom, but we're hoping we're going to have one meeting at the end of this year where we're all together as dinners. But I think like creating that atmosphere, and we provide childcare, we provide food for anybody who they need to bring in order to make it to these Tuesday night dinners, and we kind of try to make it into a family atmosphere. And I think that breaks a lot of things down and makes it into you know, place where those things can be productive.
You know, one thing that I think is that Ryan, that your model has that I think is really important is it isn't one mentor, one student. The community mentor never sees other students. What has happened for us is that sometimes you put one mentor and one student, and the mentors come roaring in and saying, the student's insane. You know, I can't understand. Why do they want this, and this? You know, and they think this, and, you know, they think we're all racists, and we're not. You know, of course we're not. We've been doing this a million years, you know. But it really helps if they've met a range of students, and they could see that this student is either insane or is just, you know, a member of a generation that has a different approach or a different way of talking. But I think getting to see a group of students would be very helpful over time. So like in a class, but in these meetings, this just strikes me as brilliant.
Yeah, and I agree that particular model, it seems like paying people an honorary stipend makes perfect sense. I think our model was more, you know, when students contact someone on LinkedIn and say, can I come in and do an informational interview? It may be a little bit more than that, like more sustained contact, but not anything as structured as what you're talking about, which sounds wonderful. Yeah, I'm shaking down so many great ideas from this.
We did do some trading of stuff that we sit on privilege, and so we traded some of that. So we traded. I got library access for a bunch of people in the community who had never had university library access, which especially in COVID was very important because it's all the digital stuff which they don't like to give out. But I managed to get library access for a bunch of people, and gym access, occasional parking. I mean, things that made coming to the university possible that other community members, it's not an open campus in any sense. And so we tried to make it more open for the people who worked with us, and that people appreciated that as well.
I love that, just thinking about the walls. I mean, because no matter how your campus is structured, there's always some kind of barrier. So
the most interesting thing is Jennifer, is that we thought when we started that we would always go out, that all the meetings would be off campus because we would go to other people instead of making them come to us. And the mentors the fellows said very easily, very early on, oh yeah, we know all the places in the community. We never get to come to campus. What, aren't we good enough to come to your campus? And we had thought about it exactly the opposite way. We that this would be too much of an imposition and we should go to them. And they said very early on, no, we want to come there. We never get invited onto campus. And I said, done. That makes it easy.
So first of all, for people who are listening, if you would like to put a question into the Q&A, please do so. And then simultaneously, I would love to hear from each of you. Let's just go in the same order we started in. About 5 years from now, where would you like your program to be? What would be kind of the next thing? Let's start with you, Ray.
Yeah, so I've had this sort of, I don't know, maybe crazy idea. I'd like to create a united way for the programs that we're all running. So we're not constantly trying to find, funding per year or for a particular project, but like the United Way creates this fund to go out and deal with problems that we all know exist and will persist. And this is a way for us to say, because we have, I think, models that work, we could all collaborate together on what works best and for our different campuses, but we have a general model that works, and that this united way for sort of publicly engaged humanity programs would provide funding for the smallish nonprofits that really can't afford to have a student, or for funding for cohorts, that might work, 2 or 3 students who work on the same project. Something like that. I would like something like that. It's not that I dislike going out and trying to find these new sources, but I think, maybe the United Way idea plus, Ryan's mentorship idea. I mean, a couple other things to put together. I mean, we would have a pretty robust way to think through what humanities will be like in 5 years. And again, we're bringing the public back into our campuses, right? Like a public university like mine, we've lost public funding. The state just defunded public universities for the most part. Yet the public still wants us. They still need us. We still produce the graduates that live in and around Indianapolis. We're still deeply invested in the communities. So I just want a better way for us to respond to those communities. And that has always been the reason that this program exists. So.
We're in, I think, yeah. Ryan.
Yes. Yeah. So I think I love that idea of working together to figure out how to make these things work and how they can work at different campuses and on different scales. I like that we're coming at it from master's certificate programs. I mean, even before that, we had a fellowship. Well, you mentioned fellowship, Susan, and we had fellowships programs. It seems like there should be like scoping possibilities and different, how do you get the funding for those? And yeah, maybe a united kind of funding. That would be lovely to have a national sort of move in that direction, because I think we're all sort of figuring it out in our siloed ways. And until Teresa, calls us up and gets us on board for a conversation, we're sort of doing it in isolation. So I'm hoping that we can come together and put together and learn more from each other. And I've learned a tremendous amount today. I know I'll be like digesting it here for the next, for weeks to come, and probably reach out to each of the panelists for advice on things as we move forward. But so that's what I'd like. I'd like to I feel like success, maybe I didn't answer the success part of the question, but I think in 5 years, I would like this to help to transform the university in important ways, so that there's more of an openness to the kind of scholarship our students are interested in, and a lot of students are interested in, and support for it. And it will look like, graduate students who are able to do the work that they believe is important and that they're passionate about. And it's sort of one student at a time in that way. But I also think there's a way too, that if you have a program like this, it will attract faculty who are interested in this kind of work. And they'll feel like they're supported if they're doing public humanities, because they'll see, oh, there's a graduate public humanities program. I'll have graduate students to work with. I can be an advisor on to this program. And so recruiting in faculty, and gradually the graduate students are the ones who become the faculty of next year. And so even those who are not in our programs, if they know people who are in programs like ours, then they're like, oh yeah, that's a thing. So I think that maybe that's 5 years, maybe it's further. But I'm optimistic. I think things, lots of exciting things, and this panel gives me ideas. Lots of exciting things can happen and need to.
Thank you.
I was going to say a national organization, and I saw that in the chat. There's somebody, Jennifer, Teresa, somebody put in the Imagining America and the National Humanities Alliance. We started small. We started a regional organization, the Northeast Public Humanities Consortium, and we found it was good. It's a COVID problem. We haven't met. I no longer have the funding at the center to bring people together, but we'll see. We published a white paper. I did a book called Doing Public Humanities, and the last chapter is basically, last chapter is basically the white paper that we put together. Matt Jacobson, my friend Matt Jacobson at Yale, has this deep belief that if you put the ideas out there, I think this is something that the Mellon Foundation should fund. I've thought that for a long time for a range of reasons. I can't go to the Mellon Foundation. I could talk about that another time, another way. But those of you who have those Mellon connections, they're funding these one-offs all over the country. Why aren't they bringing everyone together with the groups that already exist to be talking about that? And if they want to hire me to do that, I might be available. I think that's a really good. That was my idea for what the next 5 years should do. I mean, I think that these great ideas are popping up, and people are learning from each other, sort of in spite of ourselves, because we don't come together all that much. But that would be a good way to do it. And I really love the idea that the PhD students will learn that this exists. I think there's too many. Despite the fact that everybody knows 5 or 10, there's still a lot more PhD students who don't know than who do know. And I think it gives life meaning, not to be too grandiose. But this may be the only reason to do a PhD, is if it makes a difference. And so why otherwise, it doesn't matter. But so this stuff makes the PhD make sense. And I think there'd be lots of students. So I'd like for more people to know.
That's so beautiful. I think I need to tattoo this on my arm or something. The only reason to do a PhD is if it makes a difference. Right. And when I started this, it was a lot of what my motivation has been is because I came from a law practice where humanities habits of mind were not considered valuable. It was very pragmatic. You know, you'd have this case, you finish this case, you do the other case. Nobody looked at like the history, nobody looked at theory, nobody talked about any of those things. And only after I went to graduate school and was exposed to some of the humanities ways of thinking about these problems did I see what I could have done to make a difference in my law practice. So this isn't going to happen in 5 years, right? But my fantasy is that we train a whole cohort, a whole generation of graduate students who go out there and take these humanities habits of mind out into the world, and they change the institutions that they work with, and they change how we think about humanities, the humanities and the values that we have in the humanities.
Despite the threat of coughing, I just had to pop in once to thank you all so much. And I see Ray's got another comment to make. But Ray, I loved your comment in chat that yes, Susan, Ray and I have talked to Mellon about how much we would love them to bring us together. And we'll keep nudging along on that project because we just need that info share. I mean,
those who are Mellon-funded and those of us who have not been able to tap into that yet.
Yeah. Although there is an open call right now, they're moving toward more open calls. So maybe that is also a transformation in the humanities coming forward. But I just wanted to say how much I've learned today. I wanted to thank Jennifer for taking over when I, dissolve so that I don't cough at you all. I've learned so much from all of you for these past few years, and just wish we were all next door neighbors so I could talk to you my back porch about all these great ideas on a weekly basis. But we have recorded the session, and we'll let you know as soon as it's posted, along with the other great conversations we've had this year. I think that some of the things that we've learned on these in these gatherings really need to get out in the world and need to get in front of our colleagues. So I would love to think with you all also going forward about meeting up at Imagining America in Brian's backyard, or at the National Humanities Conference or other spaces, but also really thinking about building that united way that of ideas as well as money that Ray brought up. Brilliant. So thank you, Jennifer. And I can't wait till the next time I get to see you wonderful folks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much.